Jealousy. Recognition over resentment. Purpose. This book serves as a guide to understanding the true nature of jealousy, revealing its causes, effects, and law-governed consequences. It helps those trapped in misconceptions find a way out and awakens humanity to the inner laws governing emotional life. Foreword. Why jealousy must be clarified today. In the modern world, jealousy has become one of the most silently destructive forces within human life. It wears many masks: competition, envy, suspicion, and rivalry, yet, regardless of its form, it is always a reflection of inner imbalance. Humanity today is bombarded with comparison, through social media, through constant observation of others' achievements, wealth, or recognition. This external emphasis fosters an inner tension, where the soul measures itself against what it sees around it, rather than aligning with the immutable laws of creation. Jealousy is often treated as a trivial emotion, something inevitable, even natural. Yet, left unchecked, it grows into resentment, distorts perception, and severs the connection with the higher faculties of judgment and conscience. It clouds reason, blurs recognition of law and truth, and undermines the inner freedom that is the true gift of life. Understanding jealousy, therefore, is not merely a moral exercise, it is a necessity for anyone who wishes to live soberly, responsibly, and harmoniously in a world governed by laws beyond human control. Misconceptions leading to inner conflict and disharmony. Many believe that jealousy is simply the result of wanting what others have, or a reflection of affection for people or things. Others justify it as proof of loyalty, love, or care. Some see it as unavoidable in social interaction, or as a competitive drive that pushes them forward. These assumptions, while appearing reasonable on the surface, are fundamentally flawed. Jealousy is not caused by the presence of another's success or possession. It is created within the individual through misunderstanding of self, law, and recognition. Misperception of one's own place in life and of the immutable structure of cause and effect leads the mind to identify with what is temporary, external, and fleeting, rather than what is eternal and constant. This misconception generates inner conflict. The soul begins to measure, compare, and compete with others, creating tension where there is none in the laws of creation. Relationships are strained, communities are destabilized, and the individual remains blind to the true forces shaping life. Jealousy becomes a self-made barrier to awareness, clarity, and freedom. The Grail Message is key to understanding emotional law. The Grail Message offers clarity where human reasoning fails. It teaches that all human experiences, including the stirring of jealousy, are governed by immutable laws of cause and effect. These laws act impartially and continuously, whether recognized or denied, whether one indulges in resentment or seeks insight. Through the perspective of the Grail Message, jealousy is revealed not as an unavoidable misfortune, but as a lawful signal, a reflection of inner misalignment. It shows where recognition is lacking, recognition of oneself, of law, and of the place of others within the order of creation. Once understood in this light, jealousy ceases to be a destructive force and becomes a teacher, showing the way to inner sovereignty, freedom, and sober awareness. This work aims to guide readers beyond emotional justification, cultural acceptance, and social habit. It calls for the earnest observer to examine their inner state, understand the law behind the feeling, and take conscious steps toward freedom. By illuminating jealousy with the light of the Grail Message, the path to clarity, peace, and self-mastery is opened. Introduction. The human desire to compare and possess. From the earliest stages of life, humanity carries within it a natural inclination to observe, evaluate, and compare. This faculty is essential for learning, adapting, and survival. Yet, when it is misapplied, it becomes the root of jealousy. Comparison turns from a neutral measure of understanding into a distorted lens that magnifies differences and obscures the true order of creation. Humans tend to measure themselves against others' possessions, talents, relationships, or social recognition. This habitual comparison fosters inner tension, a sense of lack, of injustice, and of desire for what is not rightly theirs. The craving to possess what another has is not inherently wrong. It becomes dangerous when it is fueled by resentment, envy, or judgment, rather than a sober recognition of what is justly attainable within the framework of law. Jealousy thrives in this environment, feeding upon the misunderstanding that another's success diminishes one's own, or that life is a limited resource. In truth, The laws of creation are impartial, inexhaustible, and continuously in action. What one sees in another's experience is a reflection of alignment or misalignment with law, not a measure of personal worth or divine favor. How misconceptions of worth, love, and success arise. Society, culture, and human habit contribute to the misunderstanding of jealousy. Worth is often externally defined by wealth, recognition, influence, or appearance. Love is seen as possession or control. Success is measured against others rather than against the principles of law and conscious effort. These misconceptions plant the seeds of comparison, competition, and ultimately, jealousy. Human beings mistake what is transient, external, and subjective for true measure. They forget that value is not determined by what others hold or achieve, but by inner recognition, responsibility, and alignment with the laws governing life. When external appearances dominate perception, the soul becomes blind to the deeper order, and jealousy flourishes as a self-created barrier to insight, freedom, and peace. Furthermore, jealousy is often justified by emotion. Feelings of hurt, exclusion, or desire are interpreted as reality. Yet emotion, while real in experience, is not law. It cannot create clarity, correct misalignment, or reveal truth. It is through sober observation, reflection, and recognition that one begins to discern the difference between transient feeling and lawful reality. Why recognition of law is the true remedy. The Grail Message illuminates the true nature of jealousy. It is neither an arbitrary misfortune nor an inevitable flaw of human nature. Jealousy is a signal, an indicator of inner misalignment with law, truth, and recognition. It arises when the soul clings to external measures, denies responsibility, or fails to see the universal order in operation. The remedy is therefore not suppression, denial, or emotional rationalization, but recognition of law and sober inner observation. By seeing clearly how every occurrence, success, and interaction is governed by lawful principles, one ceases to identify with envy or comparison. The heart is freed from the illusions that feed jealousy, and the mind learns to observe without accusation, judgment, or inner disturbance. Recognition awakens clarity. It restores sovereignty over thought, word, and deed. It allows the soul to approach life with freedom, peace, and measured interaction, responding with insight rather than reaction. Jealousy, once understood in this light, loses its power as a disruptor and becomes a teacher, guiding the individual toward inner alignment, sober awareness, and responsible living. Part 1. Human Misconceptions of Jealousy. Chapter 1. Jealousy is natural reaction. Human beings experience jealousy frequently, and it is often regarded as a natural and unavoidable emotional reaction. From a superficial view, jealousy appears to arise automatically when one perceives another possessing something desirable: affection, success, recognition, or opportunity. The first misconception is emotional identification with external things. People confuse external appearances or possessions with inner value. When another achieves or possesses something that one desires, the mind often leaps to the conclusion that life is unfair or that one has been wronged. In this state, the emotion of envy arises, giving the illusion of truth. Yet this is a reaction to perception, not a reflection of lawful reality. The second error lies in mistaking comparison for reality. Humans habitually measure themselves against others, thinking that another's gain diminishes their own. This comparative thinking obscures the principle that the universe operates according to immutable law, not favoritism or scarcity. One person's advancement does not limit another's opportunity. It reflects the alignment of that individual with the laws of creation. Lastly, feeling envy does not necessarily equate to conscious recognition or understanding. Jealousy often manifests automatically, without insight into its source or implications. Emotional reaction is not recognition. Only sober observation and reflection can reveal the underlying misalignment of thought, expectation, and perception that gives rise to jealousy. Awareness transforms what seems natural into a conscious opportunity for correction and inner growth. Chapter 2. Jealousy is proof of love or affection. A second common misconception is that jealousy proves attachment, devotion, or love. Romantic, familial, and social relationships are often distorted by this belief. Many say, "I am jealous because I care," assuming that emotional turbulence validates their affection. The danger lies in confusing possessive reaction with true recognition of love. Jealousy in this sense seeks to dominate, control, or guard what is perceived as mine, rather than to honor the other's being or maintain alignment with law. It breeds conflict, tension, and restriction, all under the guise of care. Belief in protective jealousy fosters emotional dependency, fear, and manipulation. It encourages the heart to react out of self-interest rather than sober understanding. True love, according to the principles of the Grail Message, is aligned with law, respects freedom, and recognizes truth. Love does not bind or diminish through possessiveness. It observes, appreciates, and cooperates with lawful order. Differentiating inner love from possessive reaction requires reflection, self-discipline, and recognition of law. Love rooted in law does not generate jealousy. Jealousy arises only when one confuses outer appearances or attachments with what is of eternal value. Chapter 3. Cultural and Social Reinforcement. Jealousy is amplified by society, culture, and human habit. Human communities reward comparison and rivalry, often celebrating competition as a virtue. Status, peer recognition, and public approval reinforce the habit of envy. From childhood onward, individuals are taught, implicitly or explicitly, to measure themselves against others. Educational, social, and professional structures encourage comparison. Who is smarter, wealthier, more beautiful, or more influential? In such an environment, jealousy is normalized, even praised as ambition or drive. Peer pressure, societal expectation, and cultural narratives create a collective amplification of jealous tendencies. Rather than observing inner alignment and law, humans are trained to focus on external disparity, producing tension, rivalry, and unrest. Misunderstandings of fairness and favoritism further compound the problem. In truth, law is impartial and acts in response to recognition, alignment, and action, not emotion, opinion, or cultural comparison. Society's amplification of jealousy fosters internal disturbance, obscuring sober perception and obstructing growth. True understanding requires disentangling oneself from the noise of external judgment and turning attention inward to lawful recognition, where inner clarity dissolves the seeds of envy. Part 2. The True Nature of Jealousy. Chapter 4. Jealousy is Inner Disharmony. Jealousy is fundamentally a reflection of inner disharmony, not an external reality. It arises when there is misalignment between desire and recognition, when the human being seeks to possess or control that which exists outside lawful alignment. This inner conflict stems from pride, self-esteem issues, and the false assumption that fulfillment is dependent on others' limitations or losses. The more a person ties self-worth to comparison, status, or possession, the stronger the jealous reaction becomes. What is perceived as jealousy is merely the manifestation of imbalance within the soul, a symptom of inner unrest, not the original cause of human misfortune or relational disturbance. Recognizing jealousy as a signal of disharmony rather than a judgment on external reality allows for conscious correction. Through introspection, one can observe the triggers, motivations, and expectations that fuel jealousy. Only then can one restore inner balance, realign with the principles of law, and experience freedom from reactive impulses that cloud perception. In essence, jealousy is a teacher, revealing where alignment has been lost, where pride or possessiveness obscures clarity, and where recognition of law and order is needed. Chapter 5. The Role of Comparison. Comparison is the fertile soil in which jealousy thrives. Humans habitually measure the success, wealth, beauty, or influence of others against themselves, believing that such evaluation determines their own value. This practice leads to false evaluation, creating illusions of scarcity, unfairness, or personal deficiency. Comparison obscures recognition. Instead of observing reality soberly and understanding that each individual moves according to their alignment with the laws of creation, one reacts to appearances. The heart and mind judge, rather than see, producing envy and inner conflict. True perception requires the separation of recognition from judgment. Recognition is sober observation of truth, law, and cause and effect relationships. Judgment, fueled by comparison, is emotional and reactive, generating the very jealousy it seeks to explain. By withdrawing from comparison, the human being allows space for understanding that another's gain does not diminish one's own opportunity. Each life follows lawful cause and effect, and each person experiences the consequences of their alignment. Comparison is therefore a bridge to false evaluation. Avoiding it restores clarity and inner peace. Chapter 6. Jealousy and the Laws of Creation. Jealousy cannot exist outside the framework of law. The laws of creation operate impartially, continually, and beyond human perception. When jealousy arises, it creates its own consequences, often repeating patterns of tension, resentment, and self-inflicted limitation. Humans often believe that another's success takes away from them, but in truth, law functions independently of perception. Jealousy is a reactive misalignment that draws further experiences confirming the inner state. By remaining unaware, humans allow this law of cause and effect to operate unconsciously, deepening disturbance and reinforcing patterns of envy. Recognition of law dissolves the misconception. Understanding that every action, thought, and emotional state contributes to future experiences illuminates how jealousy generates lawful consequences for the person who harbors it. Release occurs only when one observes, accepts responsibility, and consciously chooses alignment with law instead of reaction. In this light, jealousy is not a random or external misfortune but a mirror of inner misalignment and a tool for awakening. Recognizing its lawful functioning allows one to act with clarity, dissolve inner disturbance, and restore harmony within and around oneself. Part 3. How Jealousy Distorts Life. Chapter 7. Distortion of Perception. Jealousy does not remain a silent inner feeling, it actively reshapes perception. Once jealousy takes root, the human being no longer sees others as they truly are but through a filter of resentment. Neutral actions are interpreted as threats, success appears as arrogance, and harmless differences are perceived as deliberate injury. This distortion arises because jealousy seeks confirmation. It subtly alters observation so that every event seems to justify the inner unrest. Motives are misjudged, intentions are misread, and reality is bent to support the emotion already present. The jealous individual no longer observes, he interprets defensively. Such misinterpretation leads to a loss of inner clarity. Instead of sober recognition, the mind becomes reactive, weaving narratives that reinforce suspicion and comparison. Truth becomes secondary to emotional validation. Over time, this inner distortion becomes habitual, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish reality from projection. Jealousy therefore does not merely react to life, it reconstructs life falsely, replacing clarity with assumption and recognition with judgment. Chapter 8. Effects on Thought, Word, and Deed. Inner distortion inevitably expresses itself outwardly. Jealousy influences thought, word, and deed, shaping behavior in subtle yet destructive ways. In thought, jealousy breeds constant comparison, secret resentment, and silent accusation. The mind circles endlessly around perceived injustice, feeding itself with imagined slights and exaggerated differences. These thoughts, left unexamined, harden into convictions. In word, jealousy often manifests as gossip, criticism, and veiled malice. Praise becomes difficult, sincerity disappears, and speech carries sharpness even when cloaked in politeness. Words lose their purity and begin to injure, not only others but the speaker himself. Indeed, jealousy leads either to sabotage or avoidance. Some attempt to undermine others subtly, while others withdraw, refuse opportunity, or self-limit out of fear of comparison. In both cases, growth is hindered. Jealousy thus becomes an invisible force shaping decisions, closing paths that law would otherwise open. Through these effects, jealousy proves itself not passive but actively destructive, steadily shaping a life that feels constrained, bitter, and unfulfilled. Chapter 9. Spiritual and Emotional Blindness. The gravest consequence of jealousy is not social or emotional but spiritual blindness. When jealousy dominates the inner life, recognition becomes obscured. The human being loses sensitivity to truth, law, and guidance. Jealousy fixes attention outward, away from self-examination. Instead of asking, "What must I recognize and correct within myself?" the jealous person asks, "Why does another have what I lack?" This shift blocks insight, for truth is never revealed through accusation. As jealousy persists, separation from law increases. Inner resistance hardens, humility fades, and receptivity to guidance diminishes. Growth becomes impossible, not because truth is absent, but because the inner condition no longer allows perception. Jealousy thus blocks growth and insight by locking the soul in comparison and resentment. It prevents learning from experience, distorts destiny, and delays inner maturation. Only when jealousy is recognized as a self-created obstruction can clarity return and the path of development reopen. Part 4. Jealousy in Relationships. Chapter 10. Toward Others. Jealousy in relationships most often manifests as unforgiveness, rivalry, and quiet resentment. What begins as inner comparison gradually hardens into emotional distance. The jealous individual may appear outwardly polite, yet inwardly withdraws respect, goodwill, and openness. Trust erodes, and genuine connection becomes strained. Rivalry replaces cooperation. Instead of seeing another's abilities or success as complementary, jealousy interprets them as threats. This mindset poisons collaboration in families, friendships, workplaces, and communities. Each interaction becomes a contest rather than an exchange. Over time, relationships grow rigid, defensive, and emotionally cold. Jealousy hardens relationships by closing the heart. It restricts empathy, blocks understanding, and prevents forgiveness. Even when no direct offense has occurred, imagined inequality or perceived preference can foster lasting resentment. The antidote lies in cooperation and mutual respect, which arise only through recognition of law. When individuals acknowledge that each person unfolds according to their own lawful path, comparison loses its grip. Respect for differences, appreciation of others' strengths, and willingness to cooperate dissolve rivalry and restore relational harmony. Chapter 11. Toward Self. Jealousy does not only turn outward, it frequently turns inward. When comparison becomes habitual, it often results in self-criticism and feelings of inferiority. The individual begins to measure self-worth by external standards, diminishing inner confidence and dignity. This internalization of resentment creates silent hostility toward oneself. Thoughts such as, "I am less than," "I have failed," or "I am overlooked," take root. Over time, this inner narrative weakens initiative, joy, and self-respect. The person may outwardly appear functional while inwardly feeling diminished. Such inner jealousy fractures sovereignty. Instead of standing firmly in one's own path, the individual lives in reaction to others' achievements. Energy that should fuel growth is consumed by comparison and regret. Recognition restores inner sovereignty. When one understands that each life unfolds according to alignment with law, not comparison, self-condemnation dissolves. Responsibility replaces resentment. The individual regains authority over inner life, freeing energy for development, contribution, and peace. Chapter 12. Collective and Generational Jealousy. Jealousy can become collective, embedding itself within families, workplaces, communities, and even cultures. Rivalry between siblings, departments, tribes, or social groups often originates from unrecognized envy passed down or reinforced over time. Such jealousy becomes habitual when comparison is normalized. Stories of injustice, favoritism, or historical grievance are repeated until they form identity. Individuals inherit resentment without personal experience, continuing cycles of rivalry and mistrust. In workplaces, collective jealousy manifests as sabotage, resistance to excellence, or hostility toward success. In families, it appears as favoritism narratives or lifelong competition. In cultures, it fuels division and antagonism. Breaking these patterns requires conscious awareness. Only individuals willing to recognize jealousy as inherited misalignment can interrupt its transmission. By refusing to participate in comparison and accusation, one dissolves collective patterns and becomes a stabilizing force for clarity, cooperation, and lawful order. Summary of Part 4. Jealousy corrodes relationships, toward others, toward self, and across generations. It replaces cooperation with rivalry, confidence with self-criticism, and unity with division. Yet through recognition, respect, and conscious alignment with law, relationships can be softened, restored, and elevated beyond comparison into mutual growth and harmony. Part 5. Why Jealousy Persists. Chapter 13. Fear of Loss. At the root of persistent jealousy lies fear of loss, fear of losing possessions, status, love, attention, or recognition. This fear arises when the human being binds inner worth to external forms. What is owned, achieved, or received from others becomes mistaken for security. Jealousy feeds on the belief that good is limited and must be defended. When another receives what one desires, fear awakens: there may not be enough for me. This fear narrows perception and distorts judgment. The individual becomes watchful, suspicious, and reactive, guarding imagined territory rather than cultivating inner stability. Fear strengthens jealousy because it resists the natural impermanence of earthly things. All forms change, relationships evolve, and recognition shifts according to law. Refusal to accept this movement creates inner tension, which jealousy seeks to resolve through control, accusation, or withdrawal. Courage to accept impermanence is therefore essential. When one recognizes that true worth lies in alignment with law rather than possession, fear loosens its grip. Jealousy fades as trust in lawful unfolding replaces anxiety over loss. Chapter 14. Pride and refusal to learn. Another force sustaining jealousy is pride, the inner stance that insists, "I deserve more." This belief quietly compares self to others and judges outcomes as unfair. Pride resists correction because it equates learning with humiliation. Jealousy thrives where pride refuses self-examination. Instead of asking what law is revealing, the jealous individual searches for blame, society, family, colleagues, or fate. This prevents growth and locks the person into repetition. Humility is the necessary tool for release. Humility does not diminish worth, it opens perception. It allows the individual to recognize where inner alignment is lacking and where growth is required. Without humility, jealousy cannot be understood, only justified. Learning from law rather than comparison shifts attention inward. Instead of measuring oneself against others, the individual begins to observe cause and effect within personal life. This recognition dissolves pride and transforms jealousy into an opportunity for development. Chapter 15. Attachment to outcomes. Jealousy persists where there is attachment to outcomes. The individual clings to specific results, relationships that must remain unchanged, possessions that must not be lost, recognition that must be sustained. When life moves differently, inner resistance arises. Desire turns into inner bondage when it refuses flexibility. Instead of serving growth, desire demands fulfillment on its own terms. When outcomes favor others or take unexpected directions, jealousy surfaces as protest against reality. This attachment binds the soul to anxiety and disappointment. Energy that should flow into creative action becomes trapped in worry and comparison. Jealousy thus becomes a symptom of clinging rather than lack. Detachment without indifference offers release. Detachment does not mean withdrawal from life or coldness toward others. It means openness to lawful change. When one participates fully in life while allowing outcomes to unfold, jealousy loses its foundation. Summary of Part 5. Jealousy persists because fear resists impermanence, pride resists learning, and attachment resists lawful change. These forces bind the individual to comparison and inner unrest. Recognition of law, humility before growth, and courageous acceptance of life's movement dissolve jealousy at its roots, restoring clarity, freedom, and inner peace. Part 6. The Grail Message Way Out. Chapter 16. Recognition over emotion. The true way out of jealousy does not begin with emotional control, moral struggle, or self-condemnation. It begins with recognition. Emotion reacts, recognition observes. Emotion arises automatically from inner states. Recognition steps back and asks, what law is at work here? Jealousy appears powerful because the human being often submits to emotion as truth. Yet emotions are only effects, signals produced by inner alignment or misalignment. The Grail Message teaches that law stands above feeling. When recognition awakens, emotion loses its authority to dictate judgment and action. To observe law behind events means to see that no success, gift, or opportunity comes arbitrarily. Each unfolds according to lawful causes, effort, ability, readiness, timing, or lessons from previous experiences. What another receives does not diminish what is meant for oneself. Life is not a contest but a field of lawful development. When recognition replaces emotional reaction, other success can be seen without threat. Jealousy dissolves as the illusion of competition fades. One recognizes that every human being stands within a personal path of growth shaped by law, not favoritism. Insight replaces reaction when the question shifts from, "Why do they have this?" to, What does my reaction reveal about my own inner state? This inward turn is the first decisive step toward freedom. Chapter 17. Withdrawing comparison. Comparison is the primary mechanism through which jealousy sustains itself. As long as the individual measures worth, progress, or happiness against others, inner peace remains impossible. Comparison directs attention outward and away from personal responsibility. Withdrawing comparison does not mean ignorance of others, it means refusing to use others as a mirror for self-worth. Each comparison silently assumes a false standard, that all should receive the same things in the same way, at the same time. This assumption contradicts the diversity and precision of lawful development. Turning attention to inner development restores balance. Instead of asking where one stands relative to others, the individual begins to ask, am I becoming more clear, more truthful, more aligned with law? This question leads to genuine progress rather than emotional agitation. Through this shift, conscious sovereignty is restored. The human being regains inner authority, no longer driven by external measurements. Self-worth becomes anchored in effort, recognition, and alignment rather than comparison and approval. Jealousy weakens naturally when comparison is withdrawn, because its fuel is removed. The soul regains freedom to unfold according to its own lawful rhythm. Chapter 18. Acceptance and alignment. Acceptance, in the Grail Message sense, is not resignation or passivity. It is peace with what is, grounded in recognition of law. Acceptance acknowledges that present circumstances are lawful outcomes, whether arising from past actions, present readiness, or necessary lessons. Resistance to reality feeds jealousy. Acceptance dissolves it. When one no longer argues inwardly against what exists, energy becomes available for growth. Acceptance opens the way for alignment, where thought, feeling, and action harmonize with lawful order. Understanding life's lawful structure transforms experience. Events are no longer judged as rewards or punishments but recognized as instructions. Success and delay, gain and loss, all serve development when met with openness. Using experience for growth rather than grievance is the final turning point. Grievance clings to emotion and comparison, growth embraces recognition and responsibility. In this way, jealousy loses its purpose and fades from relevance. Acceptance aligns the human being with life instead of against it. In this alignment, peace arises, not because circumstances are perfect, but because the soul is no longer divided against law. Summary of Part 6. The Grail Message way out of jealousy is not emotional suppression but inner clarification. Recognition replaces reaction. Comparison is withdrawn. Acceptance restores alignment. Through these steps, jealousy is not fought, it becomes unnecessary. Inner freedom arises naturally where law is recognized, respected, and lived. Part 7. Living free from jealousy. Chapter 19. Daily self-observation. Freedom from jealousy is not secured through a single realization, but through ongoing inner attentiveness. The human being who wishes to remain free must learn to observe the subtle beginnings of envy before they solidify into emotion, judgment, or action. Jealousy rarely appears suddenly in its full form. It begins quietly, as a slight discomfort at another's success, a fleeting comparison, a subtle tightening of thought. Daily self-observation means recognizing these early signs without condemnation or indulgence. Recognition, not suppression, is the key. Thought, word, and deed function as reliable monitors of inner condition. When thoughts become comparative, words carry sharpness or irony, or deeds withdraw goodwill, jealousy is already active. These signals are not failures, they are indicators calling for correction. Maintaining inner clarity requires honesty with oneself. The individual must ask, what am I measuring myself against? What fear or desire is being touched? Through such sober questioning, inner confusion clears, and emotion loses its grip. Daily self-observation keeps the soul awake. It preserves freedom not by force, but by awareness, ensuring that jealousy finds no unnoticed foothold in the inner life. Chapter 20. Relationships renewed. When jealousy no longer governs inner reactions, relationships undergo quiet but profound renewal. Interactions become lighter, more truthful, and free from hidden tension. Without resentment, communication no longer carries unspoken accusation or competition. Interactions without jealousy allow others to be fully themselves. There is no need to diminish, rival, or secretly oppose. Appreciation replaces suspicion. Respect replaces comparison. This does not require emotional closeness with everyone, but it does require inner fairness. Cooperation becomes natural where rivalry once thrived. In work, family, and community, individuals begin to recognize complementary roles rather than competing positions. Each contribution is seen as necessary within the whole, not as a threat to personal worth. Mutual support arises through recognition of law, that one person's unfolding does not obstruct another's. Encouragement becomes sincere, because it is no longer measured against self-interest. In such relationships, trust grows, not from emotional attachment, but from inner clarity. Thus, freedom from jealousy restores harmony not only within the individual, but also in human connections, allowing relationships to serve growth rather than conflict. Chapter 21. Destiny without comparison. A life lived without comparison unfolds differently. Destiny, once perceived as a race or contest, reveals itself as a personal path shaped by recognition and alignment, not rivalry. The individual no longer asks where they stand relative to others, but whether they are standing rightly within law. When comparison ends, inner burden lifts. The constant measuring, striving, and quiet dissatisfaction dissolve. Energy once consumed by jealousy becomes available for purposeful action, learning, and service. Moving forward unburdened means meeting each experience as one's own, neither borrowed from another nor stolen by envy. Success and delay are both recognized as lawful, carrying instruction rather than insult. A harmonious inner life creates a harmonious outer life. Thought becomes clear, feeling steady, and action purposeful. Circumstances respond accordingly, not as reward, but as consequence of alignment. Destiny unfolds with greater simplicity and peace. Thus, living free from jealousy is not withdrawal from life, but deeper participation in it, without distortion, without rivalry, and without inner resistance. The human being walks forward in clarity, guided by recognition, and supported by the quiet justice of the laws. Closing reflection for Part 7. To live free from jealousy is to live awake, responsible, and aligned. It is not a state achieved once and kept effortlessly, but a way of being sustained through daily recognition. In this way, jealousy ceases to be a recurring struggle and becomes a completed lesson, transformed into insight, balance, and inner freedom. Part 8. Jealousy is Test and Teacher. Chapter 22. Why Life Presents Rivalry. Life does not bring rivalry to provoke hostility, nor to encourage comparison, but to expose inner misalignment. Wherever jealousy arises, it points unerringly to something within that has not yet come into balance. Thus, rivalry is not imposed from outside, it appears where the human being is inwardly vulnerable. Experiences of apparent inequality, differences in talent, opportunity, recognition, or success, are lawful instruments for awakening insight. They reveal where desire has overstepped recognition, where self-worth has become dependent on external measure. Without such experiences, these distortions would remain hidden. Strength is not proven by hardening against others, but by remaining inwardly flexible while facing challenge. Hardening leads to resistance, bitterness, and withdrawal from life. True strength remains receptive, learning-oriented, and calm. It does not deny feeling, but does not submit to it either. Recognition is the only true response to rivalry. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the mature individual asks, "What within me is being shown?" In this shift, jealousy loses its power. What once provoked resentment becomes instruction. Life then ceases to be adversarial and reveals itself as a precise teacher. Chapter 23. Refusing release leads to stagnation. When jealousy is clung to, inner movement slows and eventually stops. The individual may continue outward activity, yet inwardly becomes rigid. Thought circles old judgments, feeling hardens into suspicion, perception narrows. This is spiritual and emotional blindness, not imposed as punishment, but arising naturally from resistance. The laws of creation continue working impartially, regardless of human emotion. They do not pause for resentment, nor adjust themselves to wounded pride. Where jealousy persists, its consequences unfold with certainty, repeated conflicts, stalled growth, and increasing dissatisfaction. Refusal to release jealousy is often justified through reasoning, moral arguments, or emotional narratives. Yet none of these alter law. The individual remains free to choose, but cannot escape the results of that choice. Life patiently repeats lessons until recognition occurs. Inner growth depends entirely on choice. No external change, new relationships, altered circumstances, or social validation can substitute for inner correction. Only the decision to relinquish comparison and accusation restores movement. Thus, stagnation is not fate, it is a temporary condition sustained by refusal. The moment recognition begins, movement resumes, and life responds accordingly. Chapter 24. Standing Free in Inner Clarity. To stand free inwardly is not to stand above others, but firmly within oneself. Quiet strength arises when the individual no longer seeks confirmation through comparison. Awareness becomes sober, steady, and unshaken by the fortunes of others. Peace without comparison is not indifference, it is clarity. The individual sees others succeed or struggle without personal disturbance, because worth is no longer externally measured. Each path is recognized as lawful, unique, and purposeful. In this state, jealousy finds no soil. Thought is clear, feeling balanced, and action unforced. The human being no longer reacts, but responds. There is no urgency to defend, compete, or prove. Trust in law replaces emotional insecurity. Life is no longer perceived as arbitrary or unfair, but as exact. This trust does not require blind belief, it grows from repeated recognition of lawful working in one's own experience. Standing thus in inner clarity, the individual becomes inwardly independent and outwardly harmonious. Jealousy has completed its task, not by being fought, but by being understood. What once tested now strengthens, what once disturbed now guides. Closing reflection for Part 8. Jealousy, when rightly met, becomes a threshold to maturity. It separates emotional reaction from conscious recognition, dependence from sovereignty, blindness from clarity. Life presents the test. The individual chooses the response. In that choice lies either stagnation or freedom. Conclusion. Jealousy is not inevitable. Jealousy is often treated as an unavoidable feature of human nature, something to be managed, excused, or endured. This belief itself is a misconception. Jealousy is not woven into the essence of the human being, it is a condition, arising from misalignment, false valuation, and lack of recognition. Wherever jealousy appears, it indicates that the individual has tied inner worth to outer comparison. This is not fate, nor temperament, nor destiny, it is a temporary state sustained by misunderstanding. As understanding grows, jealousy loses its foundation and dissolves naturally. Humanity suffers not because jealousy exists, but because it is accepted as normal. Once it is recognized as a distortion rather than a necessity, its power ends. The human being regains freedom not by suppressing jealousy, but by seeing it clearly for what it is. Recognition ends what comparison cannot. No amount of comparison ever brings peace. Comparison only multiplies restlessness, for there will always be someone who appears to have more success, more recognition, more advantage. Even apparent victory through comparison breeds fear of loss. Recognition works differently. It turns the gaze inward without self-condemnation and outward without judgment. Through recognition, the individual sees life not as a contest, but as a lawful unfolding of diverse paths, capacities, and tasks. Where recognition awakens, comparison falls silent. The human being no longer asks, "How do I measure up?" but instead, "Am I inwardly aligned?" This shift alone ends jealousy more thoroughly than discipline, moral resolve, or emotional effort ever could. Recognition restores simplicity. Life becomes understandable again, not because all answers are known, but because law is trusted. In that trust, envy has no ground on which to stand. Freedom comes through alignment with law. True freedom does not come from achieving equality with others, surpassing them, or proving one's worth. It comes through alignment with the laws that govern life, laws that work quietly, precisely, and without favoritism. When thought, feeling, and action harmonize with these laws, the human being experiences inner stability. Circumstances may still vary, Challenges may still arise, but inner freedom remains intact. Jealousy cannot coexist with alignment. Where the individual accepts lawful consequence, diversity of paths, and personal responsibility, rivalry fades. The need to measure dissolves, because life is no longer interpreted through emotional reaction but through understanding. Thus, freedom is not something granted by society or circumstances. It is the natural result of living in recognition of law. Epilogue. A final call to earnest seekers. Lay down the burden of rivalry. Rivalry is a burden humanity has carried for centuries, often unknowingly. It weighs on thought, disturbs feeling, and hardens relationships. Yet it is not required. It is not commanded by life, nor demanded by law. To lay it down does not mean withdrawal from effort or responsibility. It means releasing the false belief that one's value depends on comparison. It means stepping out of silent conflict with others and into peaceful cooperation with life. The earnest seeker does not cling to rivalry, even when it feels familiar. He recognizes it as unnecessary weight and sets it aside. Choose growth over comparison. Every moment presents a choice, to compare or to grow. Comparison looks outward with judgment, growth looks inward with honesty. Comparison stagnates, growth unfolds. Growth does not require superiority. It requires openness. It does not demand recognition from others, but alignment within oneself. Where growth is chosen, jealousy finds no place to take root. This choice must be made repeatedly, not as a dramatic decision, but as a quiet, daily orientation. Each time the impulse to compare arises, it can be met with awareness instead of reaction. Thus, growth becomes a way of life. Walk forward in sobriety, clarity, and inner freedom. Sobriety is not coldness, it is clarity without distortion. Clarity is not rigidity, it is calm perception. Inner freedom is not independence from others, but independence from inner compulsion. To walk forward in this way is to live attentively, responsibly, and without inner conflict. Success or difficulty, praise or obscurity, none of these disturb the centered individual. Jealousy, once recognized, no longer returns with force. It may attempt to arise, but finds no resonance. Life becomes quieter, simpler, and more truthful. Live in awareness, always. Awareness is the safeguard of freedom. It keeps thought clean, feeling balanced, and action lawful. Without awareness, old patterns return unnoticed. With awareness, correction remains possible at every moment. This is not a demand for perfection, but for sincerity. The Grail Message calls not for emotional fervor, but for wakefulness. Not for self-condemnation, but for responsibility. To live in awareness is to live in truth. And where truth is lived, jealousy has no future.